You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
Welcome to the Dressage Today podcast, sponsored by Equithrive. This month, we've got the immense pleasure of interviewing Mary Wanless, one of my longtime mentors and the original pioneer of rider biomechanics. We really hope that you enjoy getting to hear how Mary's process came about and also get a better understanding of what the heck rider biomechanics actually are. We would love to hear any feedback you have on the interview and how it clarifies your understanding of her work.
Can't wait to talk to her. I mean, she is the mother of it all, isn't she?
She is. Yes. I say she is the godmother of rider biomechanics. And in addition to that, we welcome any judging questions you may have for Aviva for our Ask the L segment. So feel free to email either of us at the addresses provided in the transcript. And always remember, if you like what we're doing, make sure to subscribe and share with your friends. So, Aviva, how are you?
Yes, ma'am. I'm doing okay.
Great.
So I'm going to give you guys a little update about my little horse, Ralphie. I've talked a lot about how he has been such a difficult horse for me and that we kind of got a bad start and that I spent a couple of months doing groundwork. And I just want to say that I had a ride today that I felt was simply a training ride on a young, relatively green horse. And I didn't feel any of the sense of anxiety or panic or tension in him that I've been feeling. And I am just on cloud 99. So excited.
That's fabulous.
Yeah. You know, I mean, he's not perfect. He has these little moments where he says, I don't think I want to do that. But don't all horses? I mean, that's what training is. And I'm feeling like I'm just riding a horse, not a ticking time bomb. So for those of you out there who are feeling frustrated and whatever, I did believe in the process, but I really do believe in the process. And to my friend Weileng, who worked with me so hard in the groundwork, thank you. And then I have a student who has a Dutch harness horse, Jill, and she's about 2 years further along in her journey with her horse than I am with Ralphie. And I taught her this weekend and we were sort of comparing notes. And it's really cool because I feel as if as I said, I'm 2 years behind her, but where she is right now is amazing. And she's been everywhere that I've been. So maybe my journey isn't quite as unusual as I think it is. It's just new for me. And it's just making me a better rider, trainer, and understander of the whole process. So that's me. And what's new with you?
Well, I'm closer to home than the last time we spoke. When we actually put the interview together with Mary, I was in Maui. I was between two clinics there, and that was Wowie Maui. Hawaii is so fascinating because at the first barn that I was at, it was hot and dry and beautiful. And then I went to the second barn, which is considered upcountry, and it was raining and cold, and I had a sweater on every day.
Wow. That's not something we expect from Hawaii.
It is really amazing the amount of different environments they have in those tiny little balls of lava sticking up out of the ocean. But both clinics were really great. I got to work with a lot of really awesome people and got a little bit of downtime. So that was all good. Now I'm in Louisiana and I'm actually getting ready to start working with Mary tomorrow. I'm here for a teacher training class, so that's really exciting. And then I get to come home and see my husband and my horses after being gone for 2 weeks.
Oh, how nice!
And then I leave again.
And then you leave again. Yeah. And then you leave again.
Yes. Then I leave again for convention in Houston and a clinic in Colorado. But then I'm home. So it's good. And there's exciting news that we can't share yet, but we're going to soon.
Okay. And at some point, what I'd love is to talk a little bit about horse keeping in Hawaii, because I have a friend and former student who moved to Hawaii who told me a lot about how different it is than it is here in Maryland. And I know horsekeeping in Florida is different, and being in Israel, horsekeeping was different as well. And I just think it's so fascinating learning about the different ways that people take care of horses based on where they are. I mean, in Hawaii, they have to ship everything in, feed
everything,
and hay
yes.
and grass, and everything gets shipped in. So it's very, very different. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that at some point. That might be a fun conversation for us to have in the future. Talk to some people from different parts of the country about how they handle things.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
I know that
would be really cool.
Yeah, because I know I went to Arizona at one point, and the way that they horsekeep was, to me, it was, quote, wrong, because I only knew Maryland. And then I started thinking about what the weather was like in the desert and what the land was like and all the rest of it. And I thought, wow, isn't that amazing how they managed to adapt and that it isn't wrong, it's different. And so I just think I'm just always interested to know how different places handle things. So maybe put that on our agenda for some point.
Yeah, something we could talk about. Absolutely. You know what I want to talk about now?
Oh, we're doing our Ask the L. For our listeners, it's nighttime and I'm tired and my brain isn't firing on all cylinders. I apologize. This could be a really interesting answer.
This is going to be
So what is our Ask the L question today?
Our Ask the L for this month is from Sasha. And Sasha wanted to know, from your point of view at sea, how can a rider show a clearer change of bend in the trot shallow loop in training 3? The figure is so shallow that there's not really much bend to it.
Yeah. I don't write the tests, Sasha. I find that the shallow loop is an extremely difficult movement to ride, and I think it's a very difficult movement to judge. I think that the best thing that a rider can do, in all honesty, I'm not trying to pass the buck, but I think in all honesty, the thing that you can do best to understand that shallow loop is to go sit at sea and have somebody ride it for you, because it isn't really what most people think it is. It is not a serpentine, and it is not a pointed, jagged, broken line. It is truly a loop. If you read the instructions, it starts after the letter. So, the first one starts, all right, here's my brain, all King Edward's horses. It starts after H, not at H. And it heads towards X, and then from X it heads to before K. But if you ride it that way, our horses can't make 90-degree turns at training level. That's a quarter pirouette. And we don't do pirouettes at trot anyway. So if you read it, it is around X. So it's a shallow turn around X. So the way that I think about riding it is that it is a multi-piece movement. The first part of the movement, and again, I'm looking at that first loop, which starts after, it's C, the second movement in the test. So the first thing that you're thinking about is showing your lovely, supple left bend through the corner and passing the letter just a little bit. This is training level, so we don't expect you to go too terribly deeply into the corner. I think of it as more of a quarter of a 10-meter circle, maybe a little bit less than that, because, again, you're going past H. And as we know, from H to the end of the ring is 6 meters. So if you are going past, you're going to about 7 meters, which is more like a 15-meter piece of a circle. How's that for geometry late at night? So the first thing you're thinking about is that lovely left bend through your corner, or your quarter of your 15-meter circle. You should be staring at the center line. And I think about staring about 2 meters before X. staring at the center, staring at X, but a few meters before X on the center line itself.
Okay.
Okay. Not across the arena because you'll go too far, but actually the center line. So first you have that lovely left bend. Then as you're staring at where you want to head to on center line, you allow your horse to gently straighten. And as you approach that point on center line, you start asking for right flexion. And remember, flexion and bend are not the same thing. Flexion is just the nose to about the point of the shoulder. Now, having said that, you're going to go a couple meters before X. You're going to make your lovely shallow loopy line there a couple meters after X. But guess what? Here's the dirty little secret. If you're sitting at C, you can't see flexion very well. So even though you are truly only going to flex your horse, you're going to bend the neck just a little bit more than you probably should. As you come around X with that slight bit of too much neck bend, you're staring down the rail again. Again, maybe a meter, maybe 2 meters before K. When you get to about the quarter line, again, you allow your horse to very gently straighten. And then as you start to approach the rail, you start asking for your new left bend so that you can make another beautiful 15-meter quarter circle through your corner. So the mistakes that I see, probably the most common mistakes that I see are that people don't remember to ride the bend in the corners. They're so busy thinking about riding that bend over X. So remember that all of that matters. There are lots of pieces to this. Or I see people overbend through the corner and then they whip their horses' heads around and the hind legs go swinging off to the left and they careen around X. And then they head for the rail and they swing the hindquarters again, and it's not very pretty. So thinking about that moment of straightness in your horse is really important, and thinking about controlling the hind legs as you make your bending lines is important. The other big mistake that I see people make is they ride it like a leg yield. So they come through the corner at H, and then they start leg yielding their horses off their right leg. And they go sideways, and they get to about X, and then they put their left legs on, and they start leg yielding back. And that's not bend. So those are some of the more common mistakes, and I think it comes from a lack of the ability to break down the test movement into so many pieces. A circle is relatively easy for people to understand. This shallow loop kind of defies definition because it doesn't meet the definition of like that walk in training 2 where you do the medium walk to E and then you make a pretty sharp turn and do the free walk. This is not that, but it's also not a serpentine. And in the olden days of training 3, when it was a 3-loop serpentine the width of the arena, we rode it like 20-meter half circles. But this is not that. It is much more subtle than that. It's also interesting sitting at C, watching people ride the first loop and then watching people ride the second loop. What I find is almost invariably the first loop is whatever the first loop is. The second loop, which is right, everyone seems to ride better because most of our horses are left-handed, and bending left over X, making that shallow loop around X, is much more supple and easy for the horses. So in answer to your question, Sasha, I think that it's a tough movement. I'm assuming that it will still be in the tests in 2 years when we change again, but who knows? It's bounced in and out a couple times over the years. But the best thing that you can do, and you don't have to go to a show and sit with the judge. If you have a dressage ring or you just have an arena set up in some way, it doesn't even need to be a perfect 60-meter arena. Sit at C and have a friend ride it for you and have them ride it the way that they think they should, and have them ride it the way you think they should, and have them ride it wrong, and watch all the different ways that it can be ridden, and then go back and read the requirements of the movement and figure out which was the way that it made the most sense, looked the most flowing and the most supple. Because, of course, what this movement is designed to show the suppleness of the horse who is not quite ready for first level work. So that was a really long-winded answer for a night.
No, but there's a lot, as you said, there are a lot of pieces to that movement. And I think it is deceptive to people. They think, oh, I just have to, make this little squiggly line and I can get through it. But in reality, it's showing much more ability than one might think initially.
Yeah. It's so true of all of the tests, right? I talk about accuracy all the time. And, the reason for accuracy is that at training level, maybe there isn't a lot going on and you have time to prepare. But when you're moving up the levels, things start to happen a whole lot faster. And if you're supposed to do a medium to collection to a half pass, you need to hit your marks because you need to rebalance your horse and you need to get your horse recentered and you need to get everything correct. And being able to ride a complicated movement like this shallow loop prepares you for making so many adjustments very quickly and breaking down the movements in such a way that shows that you are actually riding your horse using your leg aids, your seat aids, and your rein aids. Because the one thing that I did mention, one of the things that I do see as an error is people just sort of whipping their horses around using the reins. And that's not bend and that's not supple. So it's a tough movement, but it's a really valuable movement. And I encourage everybody to sit at sea and take a look because it's not nearly as easy as you think it is.
Well, thank you for that. I think that gives people a lot to chew on. And if they have any further questions while they're after they listen to this, please feel free to send them to us. We'd love to hear them.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
This is the winter. This is the time that we're all going through all of this stuff, getting ready and preparing for the next year's show season. So this is the time to really be working on all of these things and showing that you've done your homework over the winter and that you're ready to be showing where you are.
There you go. Awesome. Well, and now we get to move on to our interview with Mary Wanless.
Super.
Today's episode is sponsored by Equithrive. Trying to choose the right supplements for the right horses often feels like a chore, and you have enough chores as it is. Fortunately, there's Equithrive, whose mission is to make this whole nutrition equation easier on you and much more beneficial for your horses. Equithrive's lineup of pelleted supplements are developed with care, backed by science, and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Not to mention, they're picky eater approved. So whether you need advanced joint care for your equine athlete, plus hoof, gut, or metabolic support, Equithrive is your one-stop shop for feed tub fortification. So stop wasting your time and money. Do your horses and yourself a favor and visit equithrive.com. Use the promo code dressage today to get 20% off your first order, plus free and fast shipping nationwide. That's www.equithrive.com. So today, Aviva and I have the wonderful pleasure of getting to speak to Mary Wanless, the creator of the Ride With Your Mind Rider Biomechanics system, and as I like to call her, the godmother of rider biomechanics. So Mary, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me.
And where are you right now when we're talking to you?
I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I've just taught a 3-day clinic there, and that's part of a tour of the US that I'm doing.
And you do 2 tours a year, is that correct?
It was 2 this year. Prior years, it's been 3.
Okay. And besides coming to the US, have you traveled much to teach in other countries?
I have. I've taught in the past in Canada, also Australia and New Zealand, South Africa, and a little bit in Europe. There are other coaches in my work who are native speakers in most of the European languages. So I don't teach in Europe that much, but some European countries too.
How long have you been doing this, Mary?
It dates back to 1980.
Wow.
And my teaching internationally dates back to 1991.
That's incredible. How do you stay motivated to keep doing this?
I guess I just have a lot of passion for it, as what I see as the hidden ingredient of skilled riding and ways of thinking about it, doing it, explaining it that should be available to riders that never have been.
How did you get started? I mean, most people today think about at least peripherally biomechanics, but in 1980, people weren't thinking about that. How did you even open your mind to something like that?
Well, that's a bit of a long story. Part of the story is I have a degree in physics, and I spent a lot of years racking my brain over the waves and the particles and studied quantum mechanics extensively, and therefore faced many unsolvable questions that eventually you'd figure out the maths and how to solve it. And having a physicist's brain always left me thinking there must be rules of cause and effect here. There must be things my teachers aren't telling me. There have to be underlying principles that make this work or not work. And I'm not a talented rider, and I was struggling my way through my British Horse Society exams, and I actually got to the point of giving up in despair. And I gave up riding for about 6 months. I sold my horse. I moved to London. And it was in the aftermath of having given up when clients of my old boss, where I used to work before I gave up, started phoning me up saying, come and give me a lesson. You explain it so much better than him. Come and ride my horse. And I kept saying no. And one day I was bored and broke enough that I said yes. And was back on horses with very much a beginner's mind. And instead of trying to be really good, which was what was happening before I gave up, I started noticing what was happening now. And in that noticing of what was happening now, stumbled on some of the cause effects and some things that really worked, and some ways of noticing that had completely passed me by when I was trying to be good.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. And the whole concept is, as you said, it's cause and effect. If we do something, we cause our horses to do something. Do you see that there are common weaknesses in riders, that sort of everybody tries to do something that doesn't work, that when they change that it makes a difference?
So there are many, many of those. And I think there's a lot of the conventional language within the equestrian culture that doesn't help riders find the right answers. So one of those would be relax. So when riders get told to relax, they tend to try and make themselves like rag dolls. But rag dolls don't work well on horses. They get sort of bloop, bloop, blooped around by the horse's movement. And riding is about stability. There are huge forces acting on the rider's body. And the rider has to be able to transmit those forces through her body. So we hear about force absorption in the horse world, but we don't hear about force transmission. And we don't hear much about stability. And those are major, major omissions in terms of what it takes to stabilize your body on top of a moving medium and essentially to become the prime mover, to be influencing the horse and influencing how everything turns out, rather than being the victim of how the horse moves and being disorganized by that movement.
And you said omissions, but I also think a lot of times there are grand assumptions. The assumptions that a man's body works the same as a woman's body, that the instructor's body works the same as the student's body. There is a lack of occurrence in people's thought process that the differences are there.
Yes, absolutely. So the omissions are huge. And most trainers and instructors out there with a student in front of them are actually teaching themselves. They're teaching the student as if the student was them. But the student has a very different body, a very different skill level, a whole set of different understandings maybe of the same words. And it really doesn't work. And the omissions are mega, almost like people being told to do X, where that will only work if they can do A, B, C, D and work their way through the alphabet.
Right.
And X is a viable next step. So the omissions are huge. And the male body to female body is a part of it as well.
I would imagine it's also different horses create different stability issues and different force issues. The
they
straightness.
Certainly do.
Yeah.
Yes. And part of my job, I think, is to be able to see that, really understand where the sort of skill deficits are for the riders and what is needed to get this particular rider on the balance point on this particular horse and in this moment in the way that maximizes her influence and doesn't mess it up, and also helping that rider to get feedback from the horse, because she has to learn to sense when she's on the balance point, ahead of it, behind it. She has to lose the wiggles and jiggles and shoves that are basically just like noise on a radio that isn't well tuned and that muddy everything. And has to get to stabilize and organize herself and read the feedback from the horse and her own body. So she begins to internalize the knowledge of how to do that rather than just being obedient.
How do you even know where to start, Mary? I mean, that just sounds overwhelming. I mean, it's not just communication skills, but it's so much more than that.
Yeah, well, it all started a long time ago. I've had a lot of practice at this, and it started with me figuring out some ABCs.
Yeah.
Teaching those ABCs to people and essentially being involved in a research project, which has been going for over 40 years now, of really working out how it works and learning to feel and see more subtle effects of the rider-horse interaction, and know how to put that into words. So it's not hard to know where to start when you have developed your eye a little bit, and I can train coaches to do this. It's not just me that can do it. People that hang out with me in riding arenas learn to see what I see, but we're looking through different eyes to the average rider and the average trainer to read the interaction rather than just go, well, the horse needs more this and the horse needs more that. But it is all learnable in a step-by-step fashion. And when you understand the principles and the laws, it becomes much more straightforward.
And does this work for different disciplines, or is this very dressage specific?
So the laws of physics don't care what discipline you ride. They don't care where you live. They don't care what you pay for your horse.
Yep.
Right? They operate everywhere to all of us. Some riding cultures, I think, have a style that they want that isn't really abiding by those laws. And some riding cultures, what they really want does abide by those laws. Jumping wise, if you don't get yourself, certainly eventing and going cross country, if you don't get yourself abiding by those laws, it could be very costly, as in your life.
Yes.
So cross country riders tend to find what they need to do, often with very little conscious knowledge of how they're doing it, more by the seat of their pants, but do it really well. And the really top dressage riders do it really well, again, not knowing what they're actually doing. But there are some styles that are not so in sync with the laws of physics and are just a style and a look that somebody's decided is the right look. There's fashions in that, yes, it changes over time, yes.
Mary, talk a little bit. One of the things about your system is that you actually teach people how to teach this system, and you have an accreditation process. So it's almost like you have a USDF university program designed specifically around what you teach people. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, coaching coaches is something I enjoy a lot. Obviously, it's where my legacy lies for the future. And, what I do is very learnable for riders and very learnable for coaches because it has principles. And when you see and understand the principles, then you can figure out, as it were, almost on a map, where are this rider and horse and what do they need to do to get to where they want to go, or at least take the next steps to where they want to go. So with coaches, it's very much about learning a philosophy. It's about developing your eye. It's about really seeing the interaction between the rider and the horse and seeing how one influences the other. And in a way, acting like an interpreter for the rider of, the horse has just told you this. He's just told you you're behind the balance point. He just told you that as you leant back, you got into water ski mode, so he got into motorboat mode, and you're decoding that for the rider, so the rider begins to get it. And coaches learn how to do that by hanging out, developing their eye, learning the theory, learning the principles, coaching each other, treating their own riding arenas when they're coaching as a laboratory. Very much learning on the job. That's really a requirement for coaches, actually, is that they demonstrate that they can learn on the job, because everybody out there has to reinvent the wheel, basically. It doesn't help for riders or coaches just to be told about the wheel. You have to, in your own experience, reinvent the wheel and go, oh, when I feel, when I do this in my body, that happens in the horse. And when the horse does that, it tends to make me do this.
And when the wheel falls off, this is how I put it back on.
Yes.
Yeah.
But Aviva, you might not think about this. You've done a very similar thing by developing your eye as an LGrad so it's a similar situation from a different standpoint. You think about how much people rely on your eye for what you see in the dressage ring at a show. And how long have you been an L judge?
Geez, Stephany, I don't know.
Pretty long time, right?
Maybe 15 years, something like that. Yeah.
So your eye is more developed now as a judge than it was 15
when I
years
started.
ago.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things that Mary brings to her program. Not only is her eye, I've never seen Mary reading fluff material. Mary is always learning. That is one of the things that I've admired about her for a very long time. Anytime I see her reading, she's delving into something deep and thoughtful, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she never takes a break. But that's how her brain works, and so she's constantly developing that and helping others to develop it.
Yes, I mean, and that's true. And maybe I read one novel a year, but everything else I need is relevant in some respects for what I do. And I'm fascinated by the body-mind, not just the rider-horse interaction, but in all of us, the body-mind as really one entity. And so it is learning to look through a bit of a different lens, because rather than a dressage judge predominantly judging the horse and just giving a collective mark for the rider at the end, I am really looking at the interaction. And I think that's actually a lot more healthy in terms of people learning how everything works, learning to do it, learning to see it. And I'd love it if dressage judges were judging the interaction, but I can't see that's ever going to happen. But I can do my bit in teaching riders and horses how that interaction works. Or rather, riders and coaches, how the interaction works. The horses already know how it works. We don't have to teach them. But we have to learn to read them and go on quite a training course to do that, whereas they are instinctively able to read us. They always know, are we crooked this way, crooked that way? Are we matching the forces of their movement? Are we bouncing backwards? Are we doing this? Are we doing that? They are reading our body. And they just do that. They just know how to do that. But boy, we have to go on a training course to learn how to read them.
Isn't that the truth?
If you were to, you saying that made me think about this. If you were to measure that connection that you're talking about, the ability to read a horse, off of the collective marks that we currently have in our dressage test systems, would you consider that as a harmony score? would you consider that, I hate to say submission, but I know that that's a word that's been on the tests for years. What would you call that if you had to encapsulate that into one box on a test?
Well, this wouldn't be very helpful for anybody, but I'd probably say biomechanical correctness.
Okay, so you would add a box. You just put a whole new box.
Yeah, possibly I would.
Okay.
And I mean, harmony is part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Submission, I would share your sort of iffiness about that word, because in a way we want up for itness. Yeah. Horse up for itness.
Yeah.
Horse in the zone.
Willingness as opposed to submission.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Horse and rider in the zone-ness. Of course, that's takes some doing when you've got judges watching you and people watching you.
Yeah.
But speaking as somebody who judges, and technically I'm not a judge, I'm a graduate of the L program, I think that harmony and partnership that you're talking about, Mary, is in every single box. Because if you're watching a rider bouncing on a horse's back and the horse is braced in the back, dropped in the back, the neck is back, they're going to get a lesser score than the rider who is able to be stable and follow the movement of the horse and, give softly into the connection and encourage the horse to go forward. So every time you ride, I mean, this is what we like to believe, right? Every time you ride well, you get rewarded for it. When you don't ride well, it is reflected at some point in the score. I realize there's a lot of controversy in the horse sports right now about what truly creates good sport. But I think that most of us can see it. I mean, form follows function, right? And if it's ugly, it's not going to score well. And if it's beautiful, it does. And it can't be beautiful if it's forced or unbalanced or unstable.
And that's true. That's all true. But it keeps the emphasis on the horse rather than what the rider needs to learn. Most riders don't see themselves as involved in a learning process and learning as their horse is learning. Most riders just think of themselves teaching their horse. That I'm really trying to encourage people to see their own process and development as a learning process and to be more proactive about that. And it takes a level of humility to do that too.
Oh, absolutely.
And to really be emphasizing the need to get feedback from the horse.
Yes.
Yeah,
no,
the
I
more
think that's
the
a
rider
beautiful
has
way to
feel,
put it.
the more the rider is sensing feedback from the horse, which tells her what her next adjustment would be. Whether that's riding a movement or before that happens, adjusting their own body.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So to really have people know what adjustment in them adjusts their horse in the way they want, and to be very proactively working on their own skills, not just training their horse to do this and training their horse to do that. That's philosophically different.
I agree.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree
And that's the kind of philosophy that I'm aiming to promote, along with giving much clearer how-to information so people don't give up working on their sitting, and coaches don't give up working on how people sit and go, oh, never mind, that's just how she is, let's do shoulder in.
Yeah.
Shoulder in fixes everything,
Yes. It does. I know. That's what I heard.
Speaking of not giving up, I want you to let's talk about all the different forms of media you have put out into our horse universe. How many books have you written at this point?
7. There won't be any more.
Books.
I've written 7 books, yeah. So 3 of them are still in print. The first one was published in 1987, so they go back a ways. The latest 3 have been in the 2000s. So those 3 are still in print. And the others might be findable in car boot sales and secondhand on
you can
eBay or
always
something
find
like
them
that.
on Amazon, even though that doesn't help you
find
very
them here
much.
and there.
You get your 3 cents off that book. And then you also have DVD series, video series.
Yes. So there have been 3 DVD series along the way. They're not so available now. And now there's a membership site on the internet called dressagetraining.tv. And so through all the media that's available, basically, and there are podcasts as well. I did 60 podcasts during lockdown and another 10 podcasts this last summer. So the podcasts which are available on, Apple and Spotify and whatever, they've certainly reached a lot of people, actually. I'm really glad I did those. They were driven by adversity with the lockdowns, but they've been a really good medium, I think, to put my message out there.
And tell us a little bit more about the dressagetraining.tv. What could somebody expect if they looked into that form?
So they're going to find some webinars and live classes that we recorded live, putting out the basics of biomechanics and under different topics. And it's actually about to open up a new level featuring some more advanced horses and riders and some more intricate levels of the biomechanics rather than the basic levels. And you can submit videos or little snippets of video and get feedback on them. And it definitely is a viable way to enhance your learning. I've met people who basically have taught themselves to ride off the internet, which I didn't really think was going to be possible when we first did this. But people have proved it is possible. And the more you engage with the processes of getting feedback, the more viable your learning becomes. And we also have a groundwork course on there, which features equine learning theory. That's not my original work. That's the original work of Andrew McLean from Australia. Mm-hmm. And we teach it in a very ride with your mind kind of step-by-step way. And that course as well can make a huge difference to people and horses because it gives the horses a conscious understanding that the reins mean whoa and the legs mean go. And you'd be amazed how many horses do not have that understanding. We think they do, but actually it becomes very clear when you do a little bit of groundwork like that with them that they don't. And that changes the horse's life.
Sure.
In a really big way and empowers both the horse and the rider.
So essentially, you have covered 3 different learning styles. If somebody reads and absorbs information, you have given them access to this information that way. If somebody can hear it and get this information, learn this information that way, you have provided a method for that. And if they are visual learners, you have also provided a method for them to learn that way.
Yes, so we've kind of covered all bases as best we can.
Yes.
And, it is true that some people do better with those different modalities. Reading, sadly, is going out of fashion. But there's a lot of my stuff that, seeing it makes a big difference. I mean, doing the podcast where all I had was words from a distance, no hands-on, no interaction other than just words. I could put a lot out there about the philosophy of learning, and I could do my best to explain things in terms of the how-tos of how to organize your body. But when you can see it, it makes a difference. And when we're in person with somebody, we get our hands on a lot. And if a picture's worth 1,000 words, a touch and hands-on can be worth 1,000 pictures, depending on who the person is.
Yeah, as Steph was talking, I was thinking, all of those things are really helpful. But for me, I have no natural talent as a rider, and having somebody put me where I need to be and show me that tactily is really, really valuable. You can watch a video of somebody riding and try to replicate it, but we all think we're doing the right thing, even when we're not. So having somebody who is there giving you that immediate feedback. So I think the clinics are just so incredibly valuable. to have that immediate feedback and to have somebody who can then move you so that, this is what you should be feeling. This is what you should be able to do. I don't know that anything will replace that for some of us.
Very true.
I mean, that is hugely valuable. And the other thing that's, changed over my teaching career is being able to do that and deliver instant visual feedback. I virtually always have an iPad with me in the riding arena. Mm-hmm. So I can show somebody what the weirdness they're experiencing looks like. Mm-hmm. Because you change somebody's body, you're asking them to feel weird. Yes. And I think one of the reasons people do not learn and improve in the way they could is that they don't understand that when they do something different, they will feel different, and that different will code in their brain as weird.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah, when you're teaching somebody and you say, that's it right there, and they say, no. It can't be. And it is, yes, trust me. And then I feel like I wish I had an iPad that I could say, look at how it is now. It is so different. Your proprioception is wrong. You need to readjust your proprioception and start to embrace, what do they say? Embrace the suck, right? Embrace the feeling of awkwardness and uncomfortableness, because we all go back to our default mode, and we've just established that our default mode is wrong.
That's right.
So reestablishing that.
Yeah, instant visual feedback is so valuable, and change will always feel bigger than it looks. I'm always saying to people, well, when you lose a filling or you get an ulcer in your mouth, it feels to your tongue like it's a huge, great chasm. And if you sort of contort yourself to look in the mirror, it's tiny.
Yes.
So the person who's leaning back will go to vertical and feel like they're leaning forward. Mm-hmm. The person who's had a hollow back will get to neutral and feel like they're rounding the back. So to that person, it feels wrong.
Yes.
And weird and overdone. But an instant photo or bit of video normally has people go, oh. And it's much easier to get people's commitment to that feeling of extreme feeling than it was in the days when visual feedback wasn't so available. And so many, at the very least, so many more arenas have mirrors now than did 20, 40 years ago.
Yes.
So are there some tips that you can give our listeners, just some very basic kinds of things that they can do maybe without an instructor to better evaluate their riding and work on improving it? Whether it like videotaping or just going online and watching videos, or what are some things that you find help people the most when you're not there for them?
I think it's being willing to keeping coming back to the basics. And, and the ABCs of riding, A would be for alignment. Everybody's heard the idea of a shoulder, hip, heel, vertical line. Hardly anybody does it. Mm-hmm. I find it really interesting that martial artists work on refining their horse stance. The basic martial arts stance is known as the horse stance. Really? So martial artists keep working on their breathing and their weight and their organization within their horse stance. Can you get riders to work on the horse stance?
They have other stuff.
Right? So much harder sell for riders than it is for martial artists to work on the horse stance. And the questions you really need to ask yourself, so this requires a mirror or a photograph or video, but the question is, am I vertical? Is my torso a box? And by a box, I mean the length of the front matches the length of the back. And if you've been taught to grow up tall and stick your chest out, you won't be a box. You'll be longer in front and hollow in the back. So becoming a vertical box is what your torso has to do. And then the next question to ask yourself, if you're just halted parallel to a mirror and you just turn your head to look at the mirror, would be, if the horse went out from under me, my magic, how would I land on the riding arena? And you'd either land on your feet and topple back on your bum, or you'd land first on your feet and topple forwards onto your knees and your nose. But you're trying to have it where you'd land on your feet and stay there, which would be the horse stance. Mm-hmm. And in that position, you can be responsible for your own body weight, and you're not kind of riding the horse like he's an armchair. you're much more responsible and much more able to get your center of mass over the horse's center of mass, which is when you are optimal as a burden for him to carry. If you're ahead or behind the balance point, you're kind of forcing him to do something to deal with that. Mm-hmm. And we have a word for that, which is very often evasions. But it is what the horse has to do to deal with your out of syncness, if you like.
Yeah, we do like to blame our horses for our own mistakes, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
It is one of the problems of riding. Yes. It's much harder to blame your tennis racket or your running shoes for your problem. But it's very, very easy to blame your horse and to see the entirety of the problem as the horse's problem and negate personal responsibility for that problem. Mm-hmm. But it is a shared problem. And wherever it started, whoever was the chicken and whoever's the egg, in a way, it doesn't matter, because whatever the problem is, it's the rider's problem to solve. The horse isn't going to wake up one day and go, I'm just going to balance tempo and impulsion exactly right today.
I say that the rider is the brain and the horse is the brawn, so you need to be thinking.
Yes, and you need to organize your brawn in the right way.
Yeah.
So it doesn't hinder the horse's brawn. Mm-hmm. And, you may be only 10% of his body weight, but what you're doing with your own body weight is so significant.
Oh, yeah. I mean, all anybody needs to do is pick up a bag of sugar and carry it in different positions to see how just a few pounds can make such a dramatic difference. And our horses feel the same thing.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt. Mary, if somebody wanted to put their eyes on you in person or get a chance to work with you in person, how would they go about finding that information out? You're here in the States right now. How would they do that?
My website is mary-wanless.com. And under that is one of the tabs that says clinics, USA and UK, if you press on that tab. So you can find out where I'm going to be on that website. It doesn't have my 2025 dates on it yet, but it will do very soon.
Okay.
Wonderful.
And that will give access to both clinics in the UK and the US.
If you had one piece of advice to give someone who wanted to go into teaching riding professionally, what do you think it would be?
It would be hone your noticing skills and your coaching skills. Hone your communication skills and learn how to look. So I'm getting beyond one, aren't I? Learn how to look at the rider-horse interaction and get feedback from your riders. It's a very one-way thing that the instructor, coach, trainer says things and the rider's supposed to just do them. But getting a feedback, even asking questions like, what did I say that helped you the most? What was the difference that made the difference there? What will be your biggest takeaways from this lesson? Mm-hmm. How clear was that to you? Those kind of questions that mean the coach is getting feedback from the rider are invaluable. And they change the ethos of learning, coaching, training. And that kind of interaction and feedback is so much more valuable than just the trainer says what to do and the rider tries to be obedient.
That's great advice.
Wonderful. And do you have anything big coming up in 2025? Are there going to be any symposiums? Do you have any big trips? Anything exciting that you want to share with us?
I'll certainly be in the US twice, possibly 3 times. There aren't any symposiums planned as yet. I'm hoping that might happen, but it's not on the cards yet.
Okay.
Well, this has been wonderful.
Yes. Mary is one of my favorite people, and I don't think in all the years that I have been doing this, I can truly say working with no one else has given me the same level of depth and thought as working under her tutelage. So she is a gift. She truly is a gift. And we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Oh, that's my pleasure. And my talent, if you like, which isn't really a talent because I've learned it, is how to put words on feelings and explain things that the horse world doesn't normally explain in a way that creates how-to information that most riders need. If you're supremely talented, you don't need that how-to information. Mm-hmm. But if you aren't supremely talented, or you're a talented rider who wants to be able to pass on their skill, having that information is invaluable. So the horse world has sort of got away on shouting louder at the natives and expecting obedience rather than being able to guide people towards feelings that are really valuable.
Yes, very well put. So in your travels throughout your learning experience, what do you think is one of the main ways that your thought process has developed over the years?
I think there's something that became very clear to me over time that wasn't clear at the beginning. So I was meeting, let's say, lots of riders who'd learned to grow tall and stick their chest out, and I was getting them to be shorter in more of a martial arts pose, to make their torso into a box, to drop their chest, and found myself saying the opposite of a lot of things that are said in riding arenas, and thinking, well, you can have too much of every good thing. And then what became clear to me over time, I've been in this process for about 20 years, when I was riding along one day and I thought, I could say I'm growing tall, even though I've been trying to get people to not grow tall in the way they'd understood grow tall for the last 20 years. And I'd been not growing tall in the way I'd learned to grow tall. I had this feeling riding along one day going, I could call this growing tall. And this happened with various other things. I could call this stretching my leg down in a way that most people do, then interpret those words, which is not helpful. And then what became clear to me is, if you think of the sayings that are said in riding arenas, handed down from teacher to pupil, like grow tall, stretch your leg down, push your heel down, relax, da-da-da. All of those sayings originally came from elite riders, the really revered riders of some generation back through time, and got handed down to us from teacher to student, teacher to student, teacher to student, till it said to you. Okay. And what became clear to me is that if those statements came out of the mouth of really revered riders, they are the discoveries of time and talent. And that means if we think of riding having an alphabet of ABCs, and then you learn the DEFs and the GHIJs through to the XYZs, that those statements are by definition from the X end of the alphabet, like the person is saying, do X. But those statements are said to the riders as if they're A's. So what we have in our conventional theory is X's presented as A's. And that's what lead people astray, because anybody that hears grow tall and stretch up, grow tall, stick your chest out, is going to hollow their back and stop themselves breathing and doing things that weren't what that original rider meant. And no normal person would ever interpret those words in the way that is what I think those words actually meant. It's not possible unless you've got ABC and you've worked your way down the alphabet.
You've traveled through it in your own body.
Sorry?
You've traveled through it in your own body.
So I've traveled through that alphabet in my own body, and I take people through that alphabet in their learning. And you have to start at ABC, and then your next step has to be D. It can't be X. So X is presented as A's, I think, is leading an awful lot of people astray in their own learning. And anybody who's really attracted to the big name is going, give me X's, give me X's, give me X's. Because big names won't be able to give you A's. They will only operate in that far end of the alphabet. They won't operate in the near end of the alphabet.
Because to them, the X is the A.
To them, the X is just what they do, just what riding is. Yes. And they probably popped out of the womb, sat on a horse, did A, B, C, D, E, F, just totally naturally, never had to learn it. They look at people who aren't doing that and think, what's wrong with that person? Why is she doing that?
Yes, that has a lot of depth to delve into for everybody that's listening to this, and their relationship with their coaches and their clinicians and their horses, to stop and think, how well do I have the ABCs? And
what are the ABCs?
And what are the ABCs?
You hear the phrase back to basics, but usually they're horse basics, ride him long and low or something. They're not rider basics.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow. That's big.
And my aim is to develop a model, and I very largely have developed a model that goes from ABC to DEF to GHIJ and works its way through the alphabet. And, I have ways of seeing it and saying it that will work for riders at all levels, and has been tested on riders at all levels, has had input from riders at all levels. Mm-hmm. And very often with elite international level riders, I'll have ways of seeing it and saying it that offer a bit of a different perspective and a bit of a different way of doing it that works in a more streamlined way.
Yes. There is one of you.
There's one of me, but there aren't. There are loads of accredited coaches. Not loads, but
yes. How many mini
a number of
are there
accredited
now?
coaches.
Do you know
and
how many
of those
across
people work their way a fair way down the alphabet with people?
Yes. How many accredited coaches do you have out into the world at this point?
I don't totally know the answer to that without going to my website and adding them up.
Okay.
There's at least 10 in the US. There's more like 30 in the UK. There's a smattering in Australia, New Zealand, and Europe.
Okay. So worldwide, not only have you yourself been able to put this out, but you have started to create the ripple effect that hopefully one day will be a wave of people who know that this is, in fact, the beginning of the rider experience.
Yes.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Although I think the reality that what's really happened is that rider biomechanics, which is a phrase that I coined a long time ago, has become a buzzword with many versions thereof that do not have the depth and the substance of the model that I have built.
Yes.
So that is actually the reality of what's happened. So please, anybody who's interested in rider biomechanics, find yourself an accredited Ride With Your Mind coach who has been through this learning process. And I think there's a lot more depth to this model than other things that will be termed rider biomechanics.
And they can also find those people, if they can't shake your hand personally, they can find those people on your website as well.
Absolutely. And many of the coaches travel and do clinics. Some have their own base in a certain geographical area, but many of the coaches travel, and some do internet lessons as well. And then we've got Dressage Training TV that can give a really good overview and understanding, and then a step-by-step in-depth way of working.
Excellent. Mary, this has been wonderful. We could talk about this for hours, but I know everybody's got something they need to go do, and I might go back to bed for an hour or two since I'm in a different time zone than you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much for joining us.